For our second scripture reading, we're going to turn to the Gospel of John, chapter 9, verses 1 through 41. Bear with me. As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents sinned? He was born blind so that God's..." Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back, able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought him to the Pharisees, the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "I put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is now that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He can speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" and they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains." This is the word of the Lord. I typically like to use the lectionary when asked to prepare a Sunday sermon. I was a little surprised to discover that this week's Bible passage, just like last week's, was an entire chapter in John's Gospel. Last week, Brian broke it up into 2 readings. I guess he thought we might fall asleep if he tried to read it all at one time. But since I'm an amateur and a volunteer, I decided to go for it all at once. Even though it is basically a story of Jesus healing a blind man, it is full of possibilities. My first thought was, why is it so long? The other 3 Gospels all have stories of Jesus healing the blind, and they are all shorter, ranging from 4 to 8 verses. John's story has 41. I took a closer look at the others, and they are all situations where people came or were brought to Jesus with request for healing. In all of these situations, there was a reference to their faith in Jesus making them well, or there was a feeling of compassion for the blind man. But in John's story, there is none of this. The blind man has no idea who Jesus is. Jesus and his disciples are walking by, and the disciples want to know who sinned, the man or his parents. Jesus says, neither. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Then Jesus spits on the ground, making a little mud, and puts the mud on the man's eyes. Then he tells him to go wash it off in the pool of Siloam. This guy has no idea what's really going on. Some guy named Jesus basically spits on his eyes and then tells him to wash it off, which of course he does. And when he returns, he can see, but Jesus and the disciples are gone. They've moved on. They've done their thing and gone on. Meanwhile, his neighbors and others start questioning him intently. They say, "Are you the same guy? How did this happen?" He doesn't really know how he was cured, so he just sort of tells them what happened, give them the facts. They want to know, where is this guy? But he doesn't know that either. So they take him to the Pharisees. It is the Pharisees I want to sort of focus on a little bit here, because they're a big part of why this chapter is so long. So I decided to take a closer look at them. And a simple definition, simple in quotation marks, from the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible is a scholarly class dedicated to the teaching of the twofold law, the written and the oral, and to the dissemination of their belief in the world to come and the resurrection of the dead. They are not mentioned in the Hebrew Scriptures. They taught laws and doctrines not set down in those Scriptures, and they promised salvation to the individual in a life beyond the grave, a concept not formulated in the Pentateuch. Yet these Pharisees were so successful in winning over the people to their innovational teachings In the time of Jesus, they are sitting in the chair of Moses, a chair of authority. The most durable institution which the Pharisees created was the synagogue. The synagogue arose as a meeting place where the public could participate in the rituals of the Jewish tradition. This insistence on public participation was opposed by the Sadducees. In contrast to the temple, the synagogue was a highly decentralized institution, which was tailored to the Pharisees' focus on individuals and their salvation. The synagogue encouraged fellow believers to come together for the reading of the scripture, the mandatory prayer, and mutual support. It allowed the individual to have, through prayer, a direct and ongoing relationship with God the Father. Little wonder, then, that it looms so large in the Gospels, and that the followers of Jesus were angry and bitter when they were expelled. In Matthew 23, Jesus takes them to task for their hypocritical ways, stating, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore do whatever they teach you and follow it, but do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they preach." He was criticizing the individuals, not the institution. The Pharisees were actually the modern or progressive wing of Jewish authority. They adhered to both the written and the oral law. They were influenced by surrounding culture. They promised salvation for the individual and were open to participation in Jewish sacred traditions. It isn't surprising to see the people take this man who was formerly blind to the Pharisees for answers. What is perhaps surprising was their focus, not on how this man was healed, but on the who Jesus was question. The Pharisees' first concern was with the fact that Jesus had sinned on the Sabbath by making mud. When they started grilling this poor guy, they asked him how he had received his sight. He's still at the stage of reciting the physical facts of the healing, just as he had with the people when they quizzed him. But the Pharisees aren't convinced because they see Jesus as a sinner. They keep asking pesky questions, which pushes the man from reciting the physical facts of the healing to reflecting on the spiritual identity of this healer. Now, prophets in the Old Testament were associated with healing, so basically he says he is a prophet. The Pharisees can't wrap their minds around how Jesus, a sinner, could heal on the Sabbath. How could he do such miraculous signs? They didn't believe him. They figured this guy was lying, right? So they called on the formerly blind man's parents. Imagine what it must have been like for these poor parents to be hauled before the Pharisees and questioned about their son. Although they did acknowledge that he was their son, and yes, he was born blind, when pressed about who could cure their son, who was this person, they dodged the question by saying, "Go ask him. He is of age." They wouldn't answer. So they hauled the man back in, right? And they started grilling him again. But he refused to acknowledge that Jesus might be a sinner, falling back on the basic fact that he was blind and now isn't. He just wouldn't give them more, right? So when they keep pressing, he notes that if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. At which point, they're disgusted and they proclaim, well, he was born entirely of sin. How dare he try to teach us? And they drove him out of the synagogue. But why is it that the Pharisees are so adamant that this miracle could not have happened? That this man is deceitful and full of deceit, just as Jesus has sinned. John uses the symbolism of blindness right, to account for their attitude. They are blind to the truth. But I was interested in trying to understand why they were so fearful of Jesus, not just in this chapter or in this gospel, but throughout the Gospels. There is this adherence to the law, but the Pharisees actually were more open to outside influence on interpretations of the law when compared to the Sadducees. They were the progressive scholars. I think there is something here that we can all relate to more or less: fear and uncertainty about change, particularly change that involves giving up or abandoning some aspect of our lives that provides a sense of security, comfort, or even identity. Though the Pharisees believed in the concepts of resurrection and the Messiah, the idea that the Messiah might be present here and now was a scary thought. It would mean giving up the security of their current status in life and give it up for something totally different, a new beginning that they really had no idea what it might look like. The significance of this type of change is explored by Diana Butler Bass in a meditation I recently read titled Practicing Resurrection. Yes, I borrowed her title for my sermon title. In exploring the concept of resurrection as it applies to making changes in your life, she relates the very significant change she made in abandoning a tenure-track faculty position. I can relate to the experience of a young PhD looking for the stability of a tenure-track job at a university. For 3 years, she had been a tenure-track faculty member in the religious studies department at a liberal arts college. But, like many academic departments, the faculty were in the midst of internal conflict over the direction of the department. As she relates, in 3 short years, I'd gone from being the liberal feminist heretic at an evangelical college to being a traditionalist church-going believer at a prestigious one. It was head-spinning. All I ever wanted to do was to teach and write and make a difference. I didn't sign up for institutional drama with its pettiness, competition, and conflict. I'd had enough. I wanted a new life. So when she went to the department chair and told her that she was quitting, the chair said, "You can't quit. If you do, you will never work in academia again." But that was the chance she was willing to take. In her words, she was free at last. Now, this is a somewhat dramatic example of practicing resurrection. None of us wants to be foolish. We want to be secure, care for our families, have some decent health insurance, and a sense that the future will unfold in some vaguely predictable way. But the sad truth is that we live in a world that often demands we sacrifice vocation, humanity, and the hope for a good life in favor of success and security in what Butler Bass called the empire of commoditized everything. She says it is our empire of death, one that kills us and yet has itself been dying for a long time. Resurrection involves death. For the new thing to come, old things have to go. The structures of domination, evils that pose as grace, and whatever undermines loving the earth and our neighbors. Resurrection can't happen without endings. New life is impossible without the finality of no going back. Grief at the tomb death. Butler Bass, on one spring day, knifed her own academic career, a sort of vocational twist on Abraham and his son of promise. Only she completed the task. She cites a poem Manifesto by Wendell Berry as something she took seriously. Don't tell Brian I used a poem. So, friends, every day do something that won't compute. Love the Lord, love the world. Butler Bass continues, resurrection is like that. You'll never work in academia again still rings in my ears. But she was right. She says she was right. I haven't. Not at all. Not at least once as I thought I would. Not in a way marked by traditional milestones, recognized titles, and social responsibility. Nope. I was reborn as a kind of mad academic who made or followed a different path. Faith is a kind of liberating madness, the courage to say no and a leap into what you don't entirely understand before it unfolds. There is a wildness to resurrection. You can't predict it. Life after death doesn't behave in any sort of normal way. Resurrection is the work of a feral spirit, an untamed and undomesticated a possibility as we humans can barely imagine. It breaks the rules, bursts through expectations, and follows only freedom and love. Butler Bass's example of practicing resurrection seems to be an extreme life-changing example. But if we think about it, we can all probably come up with examples in our own life where we made life-changing decisions. Some may have been independent decisions, such as hers, but sometimes we are forced to make changes due to situations beyond our control. Either way, I find the concept of practicing resurrection to be useful in giving hope for the new life. As I read through this meditation, I kept thinking of some of the times in my life where I made such a decision, practice resurrection. One, I mentioned this before, a couple of years ago from this pulpit, is that at the time I left my master's degree program at Western Michigan University to take an archaeology job in west central Illinois. I just had about a month left in the semester when I had this job offer and left suddenly to go down there and take this job. This is where I met my wife, Sarah, and the rest, as they say, is history. But I was also thinking about another example when Sarah and I were forced to make such a change. We had been working for several years on a very large archaeological project in southwest Colorado. This project employed close to 100 archaeologists working to save as many archaeological sites as we could before a dam went in on the Dolores River. There was a strong sense of community as we all worked on a common cause of preserving the past. It was a wonderful time, living and working in that part of the world with what became a lot of good friends. But as the project was winding down, we had to make a choice. This situation was ending, dying, if you will. We could stay in this part of the world and find work doing this type of archaeology for private companies, or we could start or continue on finding a path to academia. Now, Sarah had her PhD at this time. I was still working on my dissertation. Yes, I did go back to school and get more degrees. Sarah did have an offer for a one-year visiting professor position at Southern Illinois University. So Sarah decided to take this position in Southern Illinois, even though it meant leaving the Southwest and moving back east. I decided to tag along. We had no idea what the long-term future would be since it was just a one-year appointment, and I still needed to finish my degree. This was resurrection as a feral spirit, an untamed and undomesticated a possibility as we could imagine. We had 2 children at the time, very young children, and although I did get work at Southern Illinois University doing archaeology similar to what we were doing in Colorado, we spent the next 2 years bouncing from several jobs in 3 different states. It wasn't easy, and we certainly weren't thinking of it as practicing resurrection. But the connections we made did eventually lead to our both getting tenured professorships at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. And the experiences we had made us both better archaeologists. I have to agree with Butler Bass that there is both a wildness and a freedom in resurrection. But this also reminds us of the unpredictable Jesus, who after his resurrection shows up at dinner tables, during long walks, on a fishing trip. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to any of it, except that whenever he appears, his friends know joy and surprise and wonder anew. They are changed forever. Signs, not evidence, signs of this resurrection abound. We can see those signs everywhere we look. I think I can see signs of resurrection at, say, a wedding, a graduation, a baptism, a retirement party, even at the communion table. And I think, too, sometimes we see signs of resurrection even at places, things such as a funeral or a divorce. Whenever we turn away from that which causes death to our own souls, to the souls of others, and to the world, and walk out into the spring sun to the souls of others and to the world, and unsure of the next steps, but liberated at last to bring freedom to all, when we embrace the wild God wherever and however that God shows up, we see the signs of the resurrection Jesus brought into the world. Well, what about our blind beggar? Remember him? We'll go back to the guy sitting by the story of by the side of the road. What is the story of his resurrection? Here he was, just sitting at his usual spot along the side of the road. We don't know much about him. He wasn't seeking anything except perhaps a few crusts of bread and alms from passers-by. Perhaps he had some sense of security in his position. We know that his parents were still with him. The neighbors and others were aware of him. He was a fixture. And along comes a stranger who spits mud in his eye and tells him to go wash it off. He certainly did not understand what was happening. He doesn't know why he can now see. During the process of continued questioning from the Pharisees, he is forced to consider who this person might be, perhaps a prophet. He comes to the realization that this must be a man of God. But it isn't until Jesus returns to him and tells him that he is the Son of Man that he truly believes and is actually the first to worship Jesus as such. It is at this point that his resurrection is complete. And what are the Pharisees? Well, we see an interesting hint at the end of the passage from the Pharisees who were eavesdropping when Jesus was talking to the man who'd been blind. They say, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Perhaps they are beginning to doubt their ability to see. But Jesus admonishes them, "If you were blind, you would not have sinned. But now that you say we see, your sin remains." Alas, they do see, but still fear the unpredictability of resurrection. Resurrection might be something we associate with Easter, but Jesus, as the light of the world, also brought the possibility of resurrection to our daily lives. That should give us hope in this world of switchbacks and surprises to the fullness of life. As Wendell Berry puts it at the end of his poem, be like the fox, who makes more tracks than necessary, some in the wrong direction. Practice resurrection. Oh, that's where the title came from. Amen.